title of my talk, as Professor Vijay Mohan said, is Green Hydrogen for India's Green Future. I am Ashish Lele, presently Director of CSIR National Chemical Laboratory. So to start with, I want to say that over the last 3-4 months, I think this has been the most exciting time for people who are very concerned about climate change in particular, and about clean energy, which is part of a strategy to mitigate the climate issues. And this all started with the IPCC's sixth assessment report on climate change, which I hope many of you have seen it. What I want to do here is to show a few slides showing the key findings from this report. And the first slide basically shows that there is no geographical region in the world that is spared today because by the repercussions of what is happening to the climate today, whether it is floods, whether it is droughts, whether it is wildfires, whether it is heavy precipitation, cyclones, and so on. Almost every region in the world today has seen the repercussions of what is happening to the climate today. This graph is, of course, now very popular, and it talks about the increase in the global surface average surface temperature since the pre-industrialization era, the 1850 onwards. And what is important here is that over the last 10-15 years, when the IPCC has been coming out with regular reports, they started off by saying that the human influence on accelerating climate change is a possibility. That was how they started off. And today in the sixth assessment report, they say that the human influence is unequivocally proven. That is the fact that the CO2 emissions caused by human interventions are one of the most important reasons for the global surface temperature change, that is the global warming. And in fact, this has been now recognized also. This is the second big event that happened in the recent past. The Nobel Committee made a big statement to the world by acknowledging the works of Professor Manabe and Professor Hasselmann, two of the pioneers in the area of showing how CO2 emissions can actually cause global warming and can therefore result in all the climate change issues that we talk about. And there are very interesting fingerprints that they showed, which very clearly shows that it is really the anthropogenic emissions that are the result of what we see today as important climate change issues. So this is now unequivocally proven. What these two great scientists have also shown are the ways by which we can sort of predict under different scenarios what might happen to the global warming and therefore its adjoining effects. And these are called the shared socioeconomic pathways, and which are very nicely illustrated in the sixth assessment report of the IPCC. And what is interesting here is to see that depending on which pathway you choose, and the SSP 1.9 is the most ambitious pathway, which say that if the entire world does takes many aggressive steps to address the climate change issue, whereas the SSP 8.5 is the other scenario, which is the business as usual kind of scenario, where we don't do anything. And what you see here, which is alarming, is that no matter which scenario you choose, somewhere around 2035, we will actually hit the 1.5 degrees C average temperature rise, which was, according to the Paris Agreement, something that we would want to keep within this particular limit. Fortunately, in the most aggressive scenarios, the surface temperature will remain somewhere close to 1.5. We will not exceed it. But if we don't take those necessary actions, we can go to very significant degrees of warming, which is, of course, a disastrous scenario. These are other graphs which talk about the CO2 emissions and the non-CO2, such as the methane emissions, and what these methane emissions, what these greenhouse gas emissions would look like under these different scenarios. And of course, the leftmost is the most aggressive scenario, the rightmost is the most pessimistic scenario, and the effects of the greenhouse gases on the surface temperature, the global average surface temperature, which is the y-axis, can be shown through these predictions made by the IPCC. This slide also gives the carbon budget. We all know that both land and oceans can absorb a lot of CO2, but there is a budget of how much this CO2 can be absorbed. And today that budget is about 450 gigatons. And today's global emissions are averaging about 40 gigatons per annum. And so if it is a business as usual scenario, we really have about 10 years left to overcome our carbon budget. And after that would be pure disaster. So these are steps that we have to take very, very seriously to make sure that we do not get into those tipping points. The effects of the CO2 emissions on oceans are even more disastrous. This is the ocean acidification on the y-axis, the pH, and you can see that for any of these scenarios, we are still sort of going to hover anywhere between 7.5 and 8 pH. And of course, the lower the pH, the more dangerous it becomes, and the repercussions are today now seen in what is happening to the global reefs in Australia and so on. So these are effects which can destroy the marine diversity. And of course, as we know, anything in food chain, when you destroy the whole thing, can get disturbed because of the very strong connectivity across a planet scale. And therefore, these kinds of surface pH changes are disastrous. The same thing is happening with the ice melting, particularly on the polar caps. So this is square kilometers of ice caps that would melt under those different scenarios. And the dotted line here shows a scenario when the whole surface of oceans will be practically ice-free. And certainly we never want to reach that stage. The reason, of course, is that the permafrost, which is the Arctic ice caps, have a lot of methane hydrates hidden in them. There's a lot of carbon hidden in them. And the moment you start dissolving or melting these ice caps, it's very, very dangerous because it starts releasing tremendous amounts of methane. And methane is about 80 times as potent as carbon dioxide. And any such release in methane could be completely disastrous because it will create a vicious cycle from which you can never get out of. So these are some of the very important tipping points that we must be very worried about. Ocean sea level rise is increasing at an alarming rate, and for a country like India, which has 7,500 kilometers of coastline and many islands that are strategically very important to us, we certainly cannot let that happen. And I'm sure all of you have heard about the PM's push for programs like IRIS, which talks about disaster management for situations like these. So this is what has been happening in the last 3 months, and it has resulted into the COP26 meeting, which, as Vijay said, is ongoing right now, and some very wonderful things have already come out of it. And one of the most important ones for us is the PM's announcements, which he called the Panchamrut, and this is a national statement for the country that he made, and it has 5 things in it. He talked about 500 gigawatts of renewable installed capacity to be reached by 2030. If you remember, our earlier targets were 450. He has increased that by another 50 gigawatts. 50% renewable energy contribution to the whole of energy mix by 2030. This, I believe, is extremely ambitious, and it's excellent if we take steps along that direction. Reducing carbon dioxide emissions by 1 gigaton until 2030, something that we will have challenge in addressing this. Reducing the carbon intensity of our GDP by 45%. I'll talk a little bit about it more. And the most important one, which was completely came as a surprise, we never felt that India would announce anything about net zero emissions, but the PM took that step and announced that India will try and achieve net zero emissions by 2070. There could be many criticisms on these lines from both sides, but I believe just making such a statement has been very, very important, very ambitious for India. So I'm particularly myself very glad to hear all of these 5 point agenda for India. Our PM has been talking about this and also mentioning that hydrogen, particularly green hydrogen, will become India's biggest goal for providing what he called a quantum jump as a solution to address the climate change. And this this statement was made on the 15th of August this year, which is to me the most important speech made by the leader of the country on the eve of the India's independence. So when the PM talks about something like this, there is some real impetus for this kind of clean energy systems to get into to address our climate change issues. So I'm trying to get rid of this here. Okay, so this is basically the reason why such bold statements are being made. So if you look at India's energy and emission status today, about 90+% of our energy demand is supplied by fossil fuels. Oil and gas to most extent is imported today. Even to some extent, coal is imported, and that means $160 billion of import is the amount of bills we pay on a yearly basis. Our GDP today is $2.6 trillion, and that gives rise to 3 gigatons of CO2 per year emissions. We are the third largest emitter in the world. By 2030, our GDP target is $5 trillion. That would amount to emitting about 4.5 gigatons of CO2 per year. So, this is a worrisome number. And the target, therefore, as said by the PM, is to reach 50% renewable energy, which is the pie chart showed at the bottom. And that was a 2050 target, but he has now said this should be achieved by 2030. We don't know whether we'll achieve it, but this is certainly a very, very promising target and very positive, very optimistic target. 50% coming from renewable energy means many things. First of all, the table on the right-hand side shows that there are many sectors which are energy-consuming sectors. The blue ones are the ones that can very quickly shift to renewable energy. So power sector, light transportation, agriculture, it should be possible to use renewable energy directly there. But the ones that are shown in green, the industry and heavy transportation sectors, are difficult to electrify very quickly. And these are the sectors which we call the most difficult to decarbonize sector. This includes steel, cement, refining, fertilizers, and heavy commercial vehicles like trucks and buses. These are difficult to electrify. And this is where the hydrogen becomes a very important energy carrier. So this is one scenario. The second is what is called the duck curve, which is given at the bottom. And this is basically the megawatts of electricity difference between what is required, what is the demand, and what is the supply. And in fact, the shape of this curve looks like a duck, so it is called a duck curve. The blue bands shown on the left and right of the belly of the duck says that these are the problem areas where either you are generating more electricity than what you are demanding, so you need to store energy, or you are demanding more energy than you can generate. And that means the stored energy has to be used. And sometimes this needs to be done over a very long period of time. For example, in the monsoon period where you have very overcast skies for days or weeks, you need very long-term energy supply. Now, while batteries are of course coming up in a very big way, in cases where you need very long-term energy supply, and if you have grid fluctuations that have to be smoothened out, hydrogen turns out to be a very interesting vehicle to be able to do that. Hydrogen is a very interesting coupler between different sectors. It can take renewable energy coming from solar, wind, or any other renewable sector, and those electrons can be converted into molecules in the form of hydrogen through a process like electrolysis or from biomass gasification and so on. And this hydrogen then can be used for multiple sectors, as I said, industry sectors, refining, steel, petrochemicals, transportation, power, and so on. So hydrogen is a very interesting vector that we call a Swiss knife, which can couple renewable energy to various industrial sectors. And there are some very important first principles that you need to look at. For example, although hydrogen is very abundant in the universe, on the earth, it is trapped in the form of molecules like water. There are multiple sources of hydrogen, which is good so that you don't depend on only one source, which is a very good thing. But then you need to put in energy to extract that hydrogen, which is not so good thing. Hydrogen is a great energy storage medium. It has the highest gravimetric energy storage, 33.4 kilowatt hour per kg, but it's not so good a volumetric energy storage. So you need to compress hydrogen and store it in either a compressed form or a liquefied form where the liquefaction temperatures can be very low. The good thing, as Vijay also talked about, is that you can interconvert between electricity and gas, that is hydrogen, or back and forth at very high efficiencies. And hydrogen, when you burn, is of course zero emission, and it is very stable when it can be stored for long periods of time. So these are some of the important first principles based on which the entire sector coupling between the renewable energy and all the industry sectors by using hydrogen can be achieved. There are some very interesting reports that have come out by the Hydrogen Council and McKinsey that tells you how much hydrogen potential is there. And by 2050, the report talks about 660 million tons of green hydrogen that can be used, and it can contribute to about 20% of the entire world's energy. It can result in 80 gigatons of carbon dioxide abatement, and there are many countries that are going in a big way into hydrogen, and our nearest neighbor China is actually one of the biggest and the most ambitious program. These are, I mean, the world is today seeing an exponential growth in hydrogen deployment. There are about 500 plus megawatt scale projects that are announced. Investments of the order of 70 to 80 billion dollars have been announced, and in particular what is called the low carbon hydrogen, both the green and the blue hydrogen, and I don't have time to give details of what that means, but there's a huge increase in the production of this kind of hydrogen. About 20 million tons of green and blue hydrogen projects have been announced worldwide. The other exciting part about hydrogen economy is that across the hydrogen value chain, which corresponds to the manufacturing, the production of hydrogen, the storage, utilization, and the utilization of hydrogen, three parts of the hydrogen value chain, there is intense technology development that has happened over the last 20-30 years, and the technologies have reached very high TRLs. In fact, some of them are getting into gigawatt scale manufacturing as well. Shown here are two factories of fuel cells and electrolyzers that are now making gigawatt scale of these equipment. Also shown is a carbon fiber cylinder that can store hydrogen at as much as 700 bar pressure very, very safely. And there are many vehicles and a steel plant that is shown at the bottom that shows that these technologies are now so robust that they have been piloted almost in every geography in the world today. So what I want to say here is that green hydrogen for India is really an energy vector for self-reliance. We can produce hydrogen by only solar, wind, and water, all of which are abundantly available in India, fortunately. The dreams of India on getting to solar makes it possible to have very low renewable prices today. We are hitting less than 2 rupees a unit occasionally. And that ensures, therefore, the Atmanirbharta in clean energy for India. And in fact, hydrogen can be something that turns around the whole picture of being a country that imports fossil energy to becoming an exporter of clean energy. It would also mean a boost to these small and medium scale enterprises, create more jobs. And in particular, I must say here that as far as blue hydrogen goes, which is hydrogen coming from fossil fuels, but with carbon dioxide capture, frankly, in India, we do not have much scope of that, because as a country, we do not have any place where we can sequester hydrogen on a very large scale. So for me, India cannot really go today from gray to blue to green. We will have to make a leapfrog jump from gray directly to green hydrogen, which is actually a very good thing for India. Our minister recently announced an aspirational goal for hydrogen. He announced Hydrogen 212. And what the 212 means is again given here at the bottom. I don't have time to go through it, but these are aspirational goals for kickstarting the whole hydrogen economy in the country. So there's a huge amount of enthusiasm across India to get into this hydrogen economy. So this slide shows what could be the opportunities for hydrogen in India. We produce about 6 million tons of hydrogen in India today. We can easily reach double that number, 12 million tons of green hydrogen by 2050. That would require about 100 gigawatts of renewable electricity. That is only 20% of the 500 gigawatts target that was announced by the PM. By 2030, the MNRE has given a target for 5 million tons per year of green hydrogen, which will only require 45 gigawatts of renewable electricity. That's less than 10% of the 500 gigawatts. So there's a huge potential in India to go into green hydrogen. And the utilization of that hydrogen primarily would be in the near term This would be used in refineries and fertilizers. The government is coming up with mandates for how much green hydrogen can be used in refining and fertilizers. These industries together itself will consume all the 5 million tons per annum of hydrogen. The midterm target is the heavy commercial vehicles. It is midterm because it will require creation of a huge amount of infrastructure where hydrogen is taken from the generation points to the utilization points. For example, on the Delhi-Mumbai corridor, if you have about 35 refueling stations for green hydrogen, then the entire Mumbai-Delhi corridor, which is the busiest corridor for freight transportation in the country, can be sourced by green hydrogen, and the entire corridor can become emission-free. The long-term targets are the more difficult industries such as steel and cement, which requires very large investments, but eventually it is entirely possible. And you might have heard that companies like Jindal Steel are making already a big foray into this segment. The opportunities lie across the entire value chain, the production, storage, and utilization. And I'm only going to touch upon the green hydrogen production. We all know that green hydrogen can be produced by electrolysis. What we used to do as electrolysis experiments in the school are now converted into humongous plants, which are now commercially viable. The electrolysis technology itself is maturing. There are 3 technologies that are available today for low temperature electrolysis. This is the alkaline, PEM, and anion exchange membrane electrolyzers. The target is to really go to higher efficiency. So there are 4 parameters for electrolysis that determine the techno-economics of electrolysis. And these are the price of electricity, which is about 60 to 70% of the cost of hydrogen, the capex, which is the plant cost, the efficiency of the plant, that is how long you operate during the day. That is plant load factor, and the efficiency, of course, is how much of that electricity gets converted into hydrogen. And the yellow highlighted portions here are the ones where the numbers inside are dollars per kilogram of hydrogen. And you can see that one can reach about 1.5 to even $1 per kg of hydrogen. And these are exciting prices for green hydrogen. If you hit this kind of numbers, then green hydrogen is actually as cheap or as expensive as gray hydrogen today. And we believe that in India, this is entirely possible given the fall of renewable energy prices. There are other technology factors that we have that can control the cost of green hydrogen. And the yellow highlighted things on the left-hand side, which is the scale of electrolysis, the modularity of electrolysis, and the indigenization of electrolyzers. All 3 are important factors which can bring the cost of the electrolyzer plants down. The cost numbers are provided here. Vijay talked about modularity. The scale is important because as we go to gigawatt scale, the cost of the electrolyzer really comes down significantly. And of course, with Indian innovators, Indian engineers, we can bring down the cost of electrolyzers very significantly. I have some interesting targets here. If we have to reach $1 per kg hydrogen, what do you really have to do? And I've given some factors that can help achieve these targets. I talked about economy of scale. There are technological interventions based on beautiful material science, which I don't have time to get into, but some very beautiful nanomaterials like catalysts, some very interesting polymer membranes. These are all coming out. They are very interesting technological interventions which bring the cost down. You can actually produce very pure oxygen. And during the COVID pandemic, we know how much oxygen was important. So you can actually get a lot of credits by selling this oxygen along with the hydrogen. And of course, policy interventions coming from the government, such as giving open access to renewable electricity, reducing curtailment, and so on, coupled with the Make in India and Indian innovation, are all the factors. And I can prove it to anybody that if you take all these factors into consideration and convert them into economics, you can actually reach $1 per kg targets for India. And I believe in India, when electrolyzers come in a big way, it is possible to hit this kind of numbers. So CSIR has made a lot of contributions in this area. These are some of the products that we have developed. We are working very closely with industry in both the mobility and stationary power conversion sector. With that, I will end by simply saying that scientists, engineers, innovators, investors, and policymakers. Everybody will have a very major role to play in building the hydrogen economy in India. And if we do that, we will pole vault from becoming from an importer of fossil energy to becoming an exporter of clean energy everywhere else, and of course address the climate change issues. So with that, I thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ashish, for a wonderful presentation. Ashish, there is a question from Dr. BLV Prasad. Is there a clear breakup for 49% renewable energy, what PM expressed in this COP26?
Yes,
in terms of solar, wind, and hydrogen, any clear breakup?
Yes, there is a breakup available. These are all forecasts, of course, but solar will be the major contributor to that 49%. Wind, we are more or less saturated at the moment, unless we really start looking at offshore. We do not have any offshore wind yet. Okay. And we have a huge coastline, so we have ample opportunity to go offshore. But that is a huge capex investment. As of today, the country is betting big on solar, so that is the biggest contributor. Nuclear.
Okay, there are two short questions. One is again from Dr. Prasad. Should we straight go for hydrogen, or should we be by stepwise reaching to hydrogen? And on a related question, how do we create the necessary trained manpower to operate hydrogen-based technologies?
I will address the second question. I think it's very, very important. The MNRE is also talking about skill development programs. And in fact, I've been saying this in every forum that I find opportunity, that we in academia need to we need to bring hydrogen into our curriculum. We need to train our engineers, we need to train our technicians to install hydrogen fuel cells, dismantle them, service them. Same with electrolyzers, filament binding of carbon fiber cylinders.
Ashish, we have some time limitations. The last question is from Professor Sambat. Status of hydrogen-based fuel cells in the country about commercial viability. Maybe that would be the last question.
If you look at fuel cells today, the efficiencies have gone so much higher. And if we make gigawatt scale fuel cell plants in India, my bill of material cost tells me that the cost will be about $100 per kilowatt. That is very achievable based on the bill of material cost, simple bill of material cost. So I'll be happy to discuss details with Sampath.
Sure. Thank you. Okay, so once again, let me thank Ashish for his wonderful presentation.